All right, so we're here with our serial killer whisperer, Laura Brand, and we have a special guest today, TJ Charles. TJ's father was a police officer in Hermosa PD during the time of the Bittaker murders. And so, Laura, just tell us a little bit about how you connected with TJ and what, and why this is significant.
Well, actually, TJ found me on Facebook, my social media, and I've had a couple people reach out on social media connected to this case, and it's been awesome because I'm learning, all these new details about the case, and it's amazing your father was there, but he would have been in Manhattan PD, right?
At that time, yes.
79. So what's interesting about this is the first department that actually got the Bittaker Norris case is Manhattan PD, because at the time all they had was
Manhattan Beach PD.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
Manhattan
yes,
Beach, California Police Department.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
correct.
My
That's
dad got
right.
involved with the Jan Milan case. That's what brought him in.
And Jan was the stewardess.
Jan was a
I
stewardess.
don't remember
Yes.
what her job was. She
Yeah,
was the
she
one
was-
they kidnapped and maced.
They tried to, yeah. She was the one. They were like, she was coming home. It was around 11 p.m. at night. She was getting out of the car, and Bittaker approached her, and she remembers Norris backing up the van. And Jan was only about 3 feet from the van door. Like they almost had her in, but her screams woke up the neighbors on this Manhattan Beach street she lived on, and they all came out. And Norris took off one way, and Bittaker ran up the street the other way.
Correct.
So scary.
All right. Well,
All right. So TJ, is that what your dad? He was involved with that case. Did he take that report, or did he know her?
No, he worked under a gentleman named Fred McEwen, and Fred was he was, how should I word this? They actually made a big mistake going into Redondo, Hermosa, in Manhattan in regards to the law enforcement aspect of it. They really picked the wrong group of men to mess with and have them come after, because Fred McEwen was one of the finest law enforcement officers I ever grew up around. He was not going to let it go. So he brought everybody in, and everybody that he thought could help, and put together a team.
Okay. Well, let's back up a little bit. So, TJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about your father and his law enforcement career, and then we can kind of connect him to the Bittaker case.
Well, my family came from Idaho in 1940. My grandfather actually started with Palos Verdes Police Department and then went to Redondo Beach. And doing that, he used to take my father on ride-alongs starting about 8 to 10 years old. And you have to imagine that was a much different time. And, nowadays you wouldn't dream of taking your kid on a ride-along. But back then, it was just another day. And so after Vietnam, my dad wanted to become a police officer, and LAPD wouldn't hire anyone from Vietnam that was fresh back from the war. They told him, come back, unwind, give us a call in about 2 years. We'll be happy to start the hiring process. Well, my father wasn't he was kind of into shenanigans and, messing around and stuff. So he got in trouble when he was going to Maricosta High School in Manhattan Beach. And the police chief ended up being his probation officer. And when they bumped into each other, and he saw that, my dad was in the war and matured, and so he hired him. And so that was a chance meeting and blast from the past, and ended up giving him a job at Manhattan and working for Fred McEwen.
Fantastic.
Wow.
And went from there.
So
You got to remember the 70s was a very active time for people like Bittaker and Norris.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, not only them but others too.
so many serial killers operating in this area during that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had the Hillside Stranglers going on it, I believe, a year or two before, and it was winding down from them. I believe they arrested Bono a month before Bittaker and Norris.
Bonin, yeah, he would, because he was in Los Angeles counties with Bittaker. I don't know if it was before or after he was arrested. And Carlo Douglas, who we had on the show, he testified at both Bittaker and Bonin's trial, and then
Okay.
found out Bonin killed his nephew.
Yeah. 'Cause if I remember right, Bono lived about 5 or 6 miles from the Scott Motel.
A lot of them did.
Yeah,
Douglas
so that
Clark did.
area, that
Yeah,
Glendale area, Burbank area, was a pretty active spot.
yeah, yeah.
So TJ, what do you remember about your father telling you anything about the Bittaker case?
But not to take anything away from what happened to the victims, because they paid the ultimate price, but they actually destroyed my childhood, my sister's childhood, and many other childhood, because we went from growing up in Redondo Beach, which is a very small beach town with, we were free to do anything and everything we wanted, just be home when the street lights come on, to instantly on lockdown. We couldn't go anywhere, do anything. My parents needed to know who, what, whens, and where, and don't you dare leave from where you say you're going to be. I mean, it just really, just I saw it change my parents and a lot of other people as well. It's that carefree, relaxed atmosphere was gone.
Well, I'm sure they were terrified when they realized what was happening.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
Well,
I
especially
I
your
was young. I was 7 when this was going on. But
Wow.
what people don't realize is, cops talk amongst themselves, and that includes their wives and kids. But they don't realize that the kids have ears, so we hear everything. When they
Yes.
get a get together, or they're talking amongst their friends, they're talking to fellow adults and other cops about what's going on. I'm laying on the carpet playing with my Hot Wheels, listening to everything,
Wow.
hearing the good, the bad, and everything that goes on with certain cases, and just the cities in general. And
So what?
I was ringside to a lot of this information, even though I wasn't really old enough to understand what was going on. I felt the vibes. I heard it, I saw it, and we felt it.
What did it feel
Yeah.
like as a kid to hear about, there's these men snatching, kids off the street into a creepy van? I mean,
Well, they
how?
tried to hide that part of it, but they weren't very good at it. I mean, there's really not a way you can disguise or minimize what's going on. It was more like, don't talk to anybody, don't go here. Like the Redondo Pier where they hung out, I was absolutely forbidden to go anywhere near that pier for years.
Wow. And it's such a beautiful place. I mean, that's the thing. That
Yeah.
just
Oh
this
yeah, I
whole
used to
thing
go
is so
fishing.
scary.
I used
Yeah.
to go fishing off of it all the time.
Yeah.
And then overnight, it was over.
But Laura, don't you think that was part of Bittaker and Norris's thing? Like they wanted to terrorize these towns. They wanted to be that powerful, like monster entity that could put a shadow over these communities and scare
Yeah.
everybody to be staying in the house, and they'd have that control over things. Did he ever
Yeah.
talk about that?
Well, do you remember I said this on so many podcasts? There was an underlying theme about destroying innocence that Bittaker always wanted. And if what he wasn't just victimizing the victims, it was like he was going to these safe, safe little towns of, you know, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, where the kids just are out playing in the sun. It's Southern California going to the beach, very small beach communities, very safe. And they're, you know, Cindy was walking home from church daylight and they ripped her and put her in the van. So, you know, and then I've heard from everybody I've talked to, you know, locals on the case, same thing. They're like, kids just could not go out. Parents were just not letting their kids out. Our whole, like, the society of these beach communities completely changed because everybody was in fear for their children. So
Well,
it
it's
really
that
did.
way
It
to
impacted
today.
and ruined a lot of childhoods, you know, in those beach communities. And it really shook them. Really shook them.
TJ, what did you say? We missed it.
I said it affects us to this day subconsciously.
Sure.
With my kids and my grandkids, it's like, okay, I have to catch myself. Where are you going? Who
Mhm.
you going with? You know, what time are you going to be home? And to people that haven't experienced anything like this, they look at it like, oh, you're just being controlative or you're being nosy, when it's not anything like that. It was just, back then, it was just so beat into us and so ingrained into us of you know, be careful, that that's all we're doing, but we don't realize we're even saying it or being that way anymore.
Well, sure. And today it's so different. They didn't have cell phones back then. You couldn't track your kids. You
No.
couldn't call them. They had to go to a payphone. They had to find a phone. They had to have change. I mean, it was a whole ordeal when you left the house. But as kids of the 80s and even the 90s, we ran around until it got dark outside. That's what our parents would say. They would say, come back when the street lights come on, or come back when it gets dark. You know,
Right.
where are you going? But they didn't really know where we were. I mean, we were
No.
running. I mean, we could have been dead many times.
Oh,
I mean,
Yeah.
they just never,
let me
they
tell
never
you,
knew where we really were.
my
Yeah.
parents said, don't go to the pier. I tried my darndest. You know, it's like, don't touch the oven. You know, the
Right.
second you say don't touch it, the first thing you're going to do is go touch it. But
Yeah.
I learned very early because, you know, those cities being so small, when my dad started at Manhattan, he wasn't just a cop. He did the fingerprints. He did the crime scene photos. We had a dark room in our garage, and I remember my dad saying, "Don't go in there." And the first thing I did is I went in there and I saw some crime scene photos. And to this day, I can close my eyes and vividly see those images. So, you know, it's just a totally different time, and things just, I kind of feel like these guys stole my childhood in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I can see that. How old were you when you realized really what was going on? Like when you realized it was Bittaker and Norris, that these two monsters were running around your neighborhood stealing young girls and, I mean, kids.
Oh, it took a long time because they never told me actually their names. And, you know, being so young, it wasn't like I was, you know, looking through the newspaper. Um, and you also got to remember, this is way before cell phones, internet, and all that. Mostly it was word of mouth amongst other people. Like I said, you like when we would go to other people's houses, or especially with my grandparents, with my grandfather being a retired cop at the time, they would talk shop. You know, they would talk back and forth amongst themselves. And it was every Sunday after church thing. We would go over and spend a few hours. And it always ended up talking law enforcement stuff. And, you know, like I said, you know, they didn't have a TV back then. So I would just lay on the carpet playing, you know, with whatever toys I had and just listening. And I heard everything. And, you know, it even though they didn't tell me like their names or anything like really specific about them, I felt the vibe. You could cut the tension with a knife. I mean, they were scared, and you know, they didn't hold back when they were talking amongst themselves. And of course, it was things a kid shouldn't have heard. But you know, I heard everything, and it wasn't just these guys. It was you know, the sexual assaults with classmates of mine that happened over a weekend. And here I know these girls, and you can't say a word. You know exactly what they're going through, but you have to keep it secret.
Wow.
So I mean,
Yeah.
I heard so much. But these guys, I never saw or heard my parents scared. But these guys really got their attention, and they really started focusing on who came into our town and taking our girls.
Yeah.
And
And how many?
I could tell you there was Jim Rawson in Redondo, Tom Cray of Hermosa, Fred McEwen of Manhattan. These guys were not the guys you wanted after you because they would not stop until they got them.
Mhm.
And how long? What kind of size departments are we talking about? How many people? Like Manhattan, Hermosa? Like we're talking about 5 officers in each department or something like that?
No more, but still very small. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to imagine Hermosa Beach is only 1.25 square miles large.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's very, they probably have maybe 30,
Oh, okay.
to run
Yeah.
24-hour, days. But a lot of the help comes from the sheriff's department. They especially nowadays, the sheriff comes in and offers, help with officers and equipment and, the forensic stuff. They have a much bigger department to help out with the smaller cities.
Yeah. And then you said it, it kind of destroyed your childhood. I mean, what effect did it have on your father dealing with that case and, knowing all the inside information and trying to investigate it and capture these guys?
My father, when I was growing up, was a very quiet man, very reserved, and he didn't talk like him and I one-on-one. He never talked about Vietnam. He really didn't talk about his cases until he was older, until a few years ago when he got sick and I was taking care of him, is when he finally opened up. And a lot of it was he didn't want my mom to hear a lot of what the dirty details of a lot of things, especially like with Vietnam and certain cases. And when he was older and I was older, obviously he opened up because we would spend up most of the night when he couldn't sleep, and he would start telling me more and more and more. But he was very reserved and very, very quiet. But it's kind of like the macho man. You can't show any weakness type. That's how he was. But it was there. It was all a facade. He was just a normal person like everybody else, and it scared him.
Yeah. What were some of the things that he shared with you during the later years and that?
Well, he was very scared for my sister because my sister was their exact type, the blonde hair, cute, blue-eyed girl. And he always said, if my sister was a few years older, she could have been one of the victims. And, he always had these other kids. He was very protective of children. And, there was a female officer at Manhattan Beach who worked sex crimes. Her name was, I believe, was Jan Hogue. She was ferocious in going after people like this, and anybody that hurt kids. She was like a pit bull. She would not stop until she got a conviction.
Was that Fred's partner at
No,
Manhattan?
she was just one of the officers at the department.
Oh, because there is a female on who worked at a Manhattan PD who really helped with the Jan
It could have
case.
been.
Yeah.
I've tried to refresh my memory on a lot of these because I really did try to push it out of my memory. But these two guys just seem to keep coming back and back and back. And I think one of the reasons is a lot of people still don't know about these guys. Like across the country, a lot of people are just finding out about what these guys did. And so they keep coming, they keep being brought up. And like with you, Laura, I tried to reach out to you several years ago, but I'm not very tech savvy, so I don't know if the messages went through or not. But I actually wanted you to talk to my father before he passed away.
Oh, wow. I would have loved to. I don't know. I don't think I got any messages. I mean, I definitely would have never ignored ones about the Bittaker and Norris case. That's
You know,
wild.
I'm not very tech savvy. As you saw how I had trouble even logging on to this. I mean, I've never even done anything like this before.
You did.
Right.
You know, give me a car. I can rebuild the car, but when it comes to computers and stuff, I become all thumbs.
Yeah. Well, we
So-
connected now.
So your dad, it seemed like he was really affected by Bittaker and Norris for most of his career and I guess the rest of his life.
Yes, I think with everybody, especially like in law enforcement, is like in regards to like when it comes time to take the badge off. I mean, a lot of people don't realize it is still just a job. You know, you work your shift and you go home. And but with these guys and many other cases that they've worked, you can't take that badge off. And it comes home and it's there 24/7, whether they want to mention it or not. It's eating at them.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff they see, it just doesn't digest. It just sits there like a rock for the rest of your life. Um, like my grandfather arrested Carl Chessman. He was a rapist and burglar and thief, and that was in the 50s, I believe. And he talked about that case till the day he died. You know that he was the red light bandit all through Los Angeles and Palos Verdes and the South Bay also. So I mean, it it eats at them, especially if they don't have a way to talk it out. And back then, you weren't talking to therapists.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you went and saw a therapist, you might as well kiss your career goodbye.
Right.
You know it was seen as a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, even though it's much more accepted, there's still a lot of people that say, oh, I'm not going to go do that. I'm not going to go talk to somebody. You know, let somebody else go do that. I could take care of myself. But with my dad, just that security aspect of don't go here, don't go there, watch what you're doing, and be where you say you're going to be, and be home when you say you're going to be home. That never left him, and it wasn't that way before.
Mm-hmm.
It was go play, go have fun,
Right.
and then within a 5-month window, it's like no more sleepovers, no more hanging out over here, no more going over there,
Wow.
and just hearing their discussions. I think that's one of the reasons, other than an injury, that I didn't become a cop. I think I would have been an alcoholic, or I would have been one of the officers that killed themselves, seeing and dealing with what they do, with knowing my mentality, how me as a person, I couldn't handle it. I would have quit. I would have become an alcoholic. Some people are cut out for it. Some people aren't.
Right.
I learned early on, after seeing and hearing this stuff, hey, it's not for me.
I want to get into Fred a little bit because he is such a huge player that people don't realize in this case, the Bittaker Norris case. And he's in the book, or the books that I have coming out on Bittaker Norris. And when they did a test read with all the chapters with Fred in it, people were just blown away by some of the stuff Fred from Manhattan PD did to help bring Bittaker and Norris down, and alongside Tom Prey.
Nothing happened in that city without Fred knowing about it.
Yeah.
Fred was, and still is. I mean, he's got to be in his 90s now. I just talked to him the other day. He is still as active, and he runs around like he's in his 20s. Still goes down to Mexico to fish. I mean, he is just a a powerhouse. I mean, he, like I said earlier, he was not one. They picked the wrong cities to mess
Right.
with when it came to doing this, because Fred, he was not going to let this go.
Yeah.
And there's just no way. He is one of the most, especially in my family. These guys were my heroes. I admired these guys.
Which wait, just clarify who
Fred,
Fred.
Fred's
of course,
last
my
name again?
dad, but like
McEwen.
Fred McEwen.
Tom
Okay.
Cray, I didn't know Tom Cray till the 80s after this case. But he too, a man of conviction, of integrity. There is no finer men that I know of that worked this case. These guys were not ever going to give up. They'd still be working on it to this day if they didn't catch them. That's the kind of men that they are. They would not stop until they caught those guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I wanted to point out, because the case really, actually, they had no idea there was two serial killers pulling girls
No,
off
they
the
didn't.
street with a van. It wasn't until Jan Mallon, who
Yeah.
was the flight attendant. So she was coming home 11 p.m. to Manhattan Beach, and I've spoken to Jan and I've spoken to Bittaker and Norris and about what happened that night, and all of their stories align up. So pretty much Bittaker and Norris were driving. They had been trolling and hunting all day. They spotted Jan, I think, because she had a convertible, and they saw like the blonde hair, and they were like, let's follow her. But Norris used to go to LAX instead of Bittaker, and they would wait for the airline attendants to like go to their cars, and they'd follow them back home from their cars. It's but they had followed Jan that night, and she had a detached garage from her place. So she had got out of her car to manually open the garage for, all the, what is it? People who don't even know that we used to actually manually open the garage doors. So she got out to do that. And it was when she got out to do that was when Bittaker, she saw the van backing up. And it was Norris, and the light inside, she thought it was weird because the light inside of the van was on, and she could see Norris's face very clearly. He's just backing it up, and she was like, that's weird. And she was going back to her car to pull her car in, and then Bittaker approaches her. And first she was just confused. She was like, hi, can I help you? And then she said it was like, her exact words to me were she saw the devil in his eyes. And that's, she was like, he didn't say anything. Like, he was just on mission coming towards her, and he started macing her. He threw her on the ground. She like almost like broke her elbow, and she had glasses on. He ripped the glasses off. That broke. She couldn't see. He's macing her, has all these chemicals in her face, and he's just pulling her, and she's 90 pounds. And the van's right there, and she's just screaming. They come out. So Norris drives down that street, Bittaker comes out that street, and an old woman actually grabbed Bittaker as he's running away. And she was like, oh my God, what's going on? And he was like, there's been a huge car accident, because like the tires were screeching. So he was like on the spot. He's like, there's been a huge accident. Oh my God, go inside, call the police. And he just took off. And
yeah, that wouldn't happen today.
Not today. Yeah.
Not today.
So the first people, so this is the first time like they actually got witnesses came out and saw a van. This is how the whole case came, and the first people who responded was Fred McEwen and Jane Hodge from Manhattan PD. So this is actually where it actually started. They're going, okay, there's a report of a van. This girl obviously was almost abducted. This is when the ball actually starts rolling. So, Fred played a huge role in this because he was the one who took on Jan's case. He was there with Jan the night she was maced and everything.
Yeah, and he was not one to play games. When he did something, it was 110% from start to finish.
Yeah.
He had the best guy ever to back her up and go after and take her case.
And McEwen doesn't just stop there, because he actually, when they finally, how Paul and Tom got involved in the case is they were handling Robin Robeck's case. She was a girl who was taken from the Hermosa Strand one night, right? And she was taken, she was raped, and they just like threw her out of the van, but it was in Hermosa Beach. So this is the case that went to Tom Cray and Paul Bynum. And somewhere along the way, she had described a van, and McEwen and Hodge hooked up with Paul and Tom Cray from Hermosa Beach, saying, okay, we got these reports of this van, maybe there's something we got to check into. Then Joe Jackson comes forward, okay? And that day, Tom Cray was out of work. It was just his day off. So it was the people who went to go speak to Joe Jackson was Paul Bynum, Fred McEwen, and Jane Hodge. Those were the three people who were there that day talking to Joe Jackson when he gave his first initial report about it. He's saying, hey, these two guys in the van are going up and murdering girls. Now, if you remember in the past episodes, this is where the last line, I have the whole transcribed report. Paul Bynum goes, when I go to them, what are they going to tell me about you, Joe? And Joe goes, they're going to tell you I was involved with the Knott's Berry Farm murder, but it's bullshit. And then the tape recording cuts off. There's no somebody press stopped in that meeting. And we know Joe Jackson was there, Paul Bynum was there, Fred McEwen was there, and Jane Hodge was there in that first initial meeting. Now, when I spoke
that doesn't surprise me that
the
tape was stopped.
Well, then I went, this is what makes it even more fascinating is Paul Bynum was very good friends with Tom Cray. I mean, they were friends outside of work, very close.
They all were.
They all were, right. When I called Tom and I read him that report and I said, what is going on with Knott's Berry Farm? He was floored. He goes, Laura, I've never seen that report. I sent it to him. And he goes, Paul never told me about this. He goes, I don't understand why Paul would have never told me about Knott's Berry, why they would have stopped the tape, why they wouldn't have, he goes, I just can't even, I don't know why Paul never told me. I was in work the next day. So that's another reason I really wanted to talk to Fred. But then there's also another big, huge part that Fred played in this is, okay, so Joe's now come forward. Now they have Jan Malin and they have Robin Robeck. Okay, this is when the wheels start going on the Bittaker Norris case. This is when they finally realize, okay, we have two sickos in our community. This is when it really started to, because I mean, they were active since, Norris was January 79. Nobody had any idea. There was no task force. Nobody had any idea there was, a serial killer on the loose. They were so under the radar. Nobody knew. So it was really these four that actually put the pieces together. It's amazing police work. Incredible. Because they literally left nothing. No clues, no trace, no nothing. And they still were able to put this together. So this is when it starts going. So the first thing they do out of Hermosa PD is they called Norris's parole officer. Because remember, Norris is on parole. And he starts doing a mobile surveillance for 3 days. After only 24 hours, he calls and he goes, I've caught this guy stalking women outside their houses, going to their workplace, and buying copious amounts of drugs. So then Paul, Tom, and Fred McEwen, along with the parole officer, on the third day, they all do a mobile surveillance on Norris, and they surveil everything. They see him going to girls' workplaces. They see him buying a literal trash bag full of marijuana back in 1979 and leaving it on the front of his seat. Paul got out of the car and looked in, and it was open. There was all his drugs. So they're like, perfect. Now we have an opportunity to search him. So they waited until he drove just a mile back to his house. He was in Hermosa Beach. And McEwen was Fred was the first one out of the car, gun raised right in Norris's face and said, drop it. So McEwen was the first one on Norris during the arrest. Yeah. So it was a huge takedown.
That's exactly something that Fred would do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Laura, regarding the Knott's Berry Farm murders that we've talked about so much, why do you think that happened? Why do you think that they just shut the tape off? And
I have, to this day, I was telling him, I have no idea because Tom doesn't know. Tom was just as shocked as I was. So, and that was his partner and his best friend. So it's just one of these things on the case that will always be kind of a mystery to me. The same with, with Lynette Ledford, and it was the brother or sister who who were hanging out with Bittaker and Norris that night. There's a lot of I've done a deep dive investigating the case for 5 years, but there's still unanswered questions that I just don't have answers for, and this is one of them, and it keeps me up at night.
I
And
think a lot of people had questions about the Ledford case
yeah,
because that was so different. Because I do remember my dad saying, that sounds a lot like what the Hillside Stranglers did, posing the girl, where she's visible for the shock value.
yeah,
That was just out of character to that point for
it
Norris
was.
and Bittaker because they were
It was.
driving way, out of the way to dispose of them, especially from, and this is one of the things that bothered a lot of the cops and my dad is, why are they traveling so far? And then like with Ledford to just drop her there,
Well,
either they were getting more serious in what they were doing, or they thought maybe they were getting interrupted, or shock value. It was just so out of character for what they were doing up to that point.
Well, you
Well,
got to
Laura,
remember the one thing different about Lynette too is she was the only known victim, and she rejected Bittaker. And
Yeah.
when bodies are placed in stage, that is an act of humiliation and degradation for the victim. So you got to keep that in mind too, psychologically. She rejected Bittaker, and she's the one victim posed out, to humiliate, in somebody's front lawn too. The reason for the mountains. Now, Bittaker went to like a juvie, up in those mountains to fight fires. So he learned the back of those mountains like the back of his hand. Not only that, he was a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout too. He did all the ranks. So he was very into nature, wilderness, and now he's fighting those fires. So he learned every single fire road up in San Gabriel. Okay. And so those were really his mountains. He just really knew them well. And he knew that if you put a body up there, especially at the top peak of the mountains where he was, on those fire roads, July, June, September, doesn't matter. That body is going to be, mauled over by animals pretty quickly. And just the heat alone would speed up the decomposition too.
yeah, I want to go back to the Joe Jackson interview, and TJ, I wanted to ask your feedback on this because this is what I'm thinking why they stopped the tape. I think they probably knew they had a potential witness to these crimes and that possibly they could use him to, finger and get a testimony from him. So I think that's probably why they stopped it. And they probably had an off record conversation, say, listen, if you say this, that, and the other thing, we'll make sure that you're not going to get prosecuted. So they probably offered him a deal at that point. What do you think about that, TJ?
To certain ways, yes, but you also have to remember that was a totally different time, especially in law enforcement.
Yeah.
They were a little bit more lax with the rules. They didn't have the civil rights lawsuits like they have today. That where you violated my Fourth Amendment or Fifth Amendment, stuff like that. They were a lot lax in a lot of ways, so they how can I word this properly? They weren't breaking the law. They weren't skirting the law, but if they didn't want certain information to get out at that point, they would absolutely stop the tape. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
No, I get
it totally
Yeah.
makes sense. And it's probably because they might have wanted to use him, like Rob said, to go in there and get more information without exposing who he was. And if someone knew, anyone else knew, there was a chance that that information would get out.
And
Well,
maybe
yes, but like I said, they could not. They can't do today what they did then. I mean, people's heads would explode if they used their investigation methods then versus now.
Right.
And there was fine lines. Does that make sense? Their toes were on it a lot. and I'm not saying anything, to disrespect them or anything, but it was just a different time. The policies were different, the procedures were different, and as time goes on, everything evolves. And I if I could term it up, it was more of a old west type atmosphere back then of doing things.
Yeah. Yeah.
They like I said, if they were to pull that stuff, excuse my dogs if you hear them growling.
It's okay.
They are arguing in the background.
And I think also from reading and covering this case so extensively, what I think they were trying to protect Joe too, because what I think, my theory is, just from reading the report, speaking to Joe, speaking to Tom and everybody, I think, I'm pretty sure this is just like so classic Bittaker. It's like he brought Norris in, and he always wanted to be the teacher, and but he would put people in positions where it's like you have no choice, almost like Jigsaw. Anybody ever see Saw? Like that kind of scenario type thing.
Oh yeah, that's
Like one of those like impossible, like, and I think what happened with Joe is, because Joe was a serial rapist, I think he was out trolling with them as a serial rapist, not thinking that it's ever going to go beyond rape. Okay. And I think the Knott's Berry Farm did. And I think that's why Joe came forward. I think he was very scared because they said his story was always that Norris met him at the Dunkin' Donuts at Hermosa to confess, and he didn't confess because he also says in that interview, then Norris drove me to 8 girls he had been stalking, and they were trying to pick out his next victim. A guy who's so remorseful doesn't do that. They're already picking out, Bittaker's ordering chemicals with Norris to put in the eardrums and the eye sockets. And I think what happened was, he was in it after Knott's Berry. Like Joe had seen it. You go to the cops, like now you're in it. You're part of this. Like you didn't report it, whatever type of scenario, right? That's scary.
So
Yeah,
And
and maybe that's what they did when they stopped the tape. They probably stopped it and they basically threatened him. And they probably say, hey, listen, yeah, you are complicit in these murders. You're going to go down just like them. And they probably just turned the screws to him to get him to spill some more information.
yeah,
exactly. And
yeah,
there was no problem hitting stop,
right,
to get certain points across.
Yeah.
Or get certain answers and stuff.
right.
And the cops were smart enough back then to realize if anything like that was on tape, that could be seen as coercion, because that tape would have been used as discovery. So
Right.
But going back to about how small the area was and all this, that you brought up that Dunkin' Donuts,
Mm-hmm.
Norris's one victim that got away worked there.
Yeah, Kristen worked at the dump. She left that day. That day they met. She left at 5 a.m. They met at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
It's so wild. Yeah.
So
that's how small.
How small and
Yep.
and bizarre that this whole thing went.
Yeah.
They're basically bumping elbows. Here she escapes, and then she's actually working at the place they frequent. Just missing each other by hours and minutes on occasion.
I know. It blows Kristen mind, to this day. She'll be like, can you believe I was at the Dunkin' Donuts and they were there that day? And it's such a small community. And that's actually how Norris ended up at San Luis Obispo the first time when he met Bittaker. Is he was at Old Tony's on the pier. Mm-hmm. And she was a 27-year-old wife. Her husband was still there drinking with their friends. And she said, honey, I'm going to go walk home. And she walked out of the bar and started walking, and Norris followed her out of the bar onto the pier, dragged her into some bushes, viciously raped her, strangled her until she was unconscious with her own scarf. And it was like a month later, she was driving with her husband and her 2 sons in the back seat, and Norris pulls up next to the car on his motorcycle. And she was, that's the man who raped me. So of course the husband, they write down the number, they go to the police, and that's was the charge. Where Norris actually ended up in San Luis Obispo was the rape of that woman walking off the pier.
Which is where he met Bittaker.
Yeah, and that was their hangout, Old Tony's. Yeah,
Right.
right
And
over here.
did they ever say to you why they chose that area? Because it was so small? I mean, it just seems like it was intentional because it was so small that they just really
Well,
wanted to terrorize this whole town.
Well, Bittaker when they moved, like his adoptive parents moved over here, they were in Lawndale, which is part of South Bay. So Bittaker knew South Bay. And then Norris, when he moved with his sister and mom, it was Redondo Beach and Carson. So it was all they kind of grew up-ish, like, or later in life in South Beach area. But then you also got to think, these beach
Yeah,
communities, everybody's in bikinis,
be
everybody's in bathing suits, it's just like
you can
any
be in each of
predator.
those cities within 5 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just
I mean,
seems very kind of exposing themselves by basically, as they say, don't shit where you eat. And they were doing that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it things like this didn't happen in Redondo, Hermosa, in Manhattan back. It was such a shock. We heard about it. We knew the bigger cities. We're 13 miles south of LA, so we heard about all the crimes in LA and whatnot. But the little beach towns it was just like a little haven surrounded by bigger cities. And when this happened, I can't even describe the shock that everybody was in. I mean, it totally shut down everything. And you got to
Yeah.
remember, these are beach towns, so they survived off tourist dollars. So they tried to minimize what people heard to protect the cities, to keep the tourists coming,
Yeah.
but they couldn't. It became national, actually international,
Yeah.
when it all came down.
Yeah. What was it like when it did finally go to trial and there were cameras at the trial? Because this was the first televised court proceeding in California. That must have been a whirlwind, just the trial.
I have vague memories of that. Excuse the dogs again. They're
all right.
doing what they do. My father had a couple other cases that were big that was going on at the same time. So with my age at the time and other things, it's kind of commingled. I tried to refresh my memory on a lot of things. But as for that, as the trial itself, I don't really recall much.
Yeah. I'm sure your parents probably shielded you away from
They
that as
tried.
well.
They
Yeah.
tried on a lot of things. They
But
tried.
you told me in a message you've actually held the Ledford tape in your hand.
Yeah, for years, I used to work at a gun shop in Hermosa in Manhattan, and when they closed, they had these huge gun safes, and I used to be a gunsmith and all that stuff. So the owner gave me this safe, and I was still pretty young when this happened. I was still living at home, and my dad's like, "Where are you going to put this thing?" Because it was huge, probably about the size of 3 or 4 refrigerators side by side.
Oh.
And I had nowhere to put it. And my dad's like, "Well, let's lend it to the police department." And to this day, my gun safe is in the basement of the Hermosa Beach Police Department. And my dad would take me down there, when I was a kid and all. And yeah, in that safe for years was the actual tape and its evidence bag. And
You remind us what that tape is again, Laura? The Ledford tape?
That
the
was
torture tape.
the torture tape. Yeah. That was played in court.
It was the tape that was found in the van.
Yeah.
And that is how Bittaker and Norris were caught, was because the tape was accidentally left in the van.
Correct.
Hey, there's one
Correct.
thing that always didn't sit well with me when it comes to the evidence in that van, because there was a rumor that when the defense attorney got the van out of impound, that he unscrewed a panel and took pictures and tapes and stuff. I don't believe that. There's
I've
nobody
heard that.
to convince me that officers like Tom Cray and the other guys, they would not have gone through that van completely. I don't believe that they missed any evidence whatsoever in that van.
This is actually, I don't know if you guys remember this on a past episode. Remember Carlo Douglas said that the attorney went at night because they had put the van in impound in Hermosa. Now they were waiting on Paul Bynum had gotten a Remy warrant, and they had arrested them. There was another thing they had to do to search the van. The van was not searched, right? They had it in impound, but it was not searched right away. They had to wait on
Yeah, they had to wait for a
something.
warrant.
And this is when Carlo was talking about this, how he gets very fired up in the episode. He goes, and that scumbag attorney went down and unscrewed the stuff and took some stuff. And so that's why it's always been speculated. And he was the one who also went behind Zodi's department store and got all the photographs. And if you remember, the judge actually had to say to Bittaker's attorney that you have to hand over everything that you found behind Zodi's. I don't know. I don't know whether or not, Garber went and took some stuff out of the van from impound. I don't know if that's true or not. I do know, we've spoken with Jason Spence, the PI. He did go behind Zodi's. Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Wasn't he the
did
one that he
return-
sent? Wasn't he the one he sent? to
He
go get
sent
this?
it behind Zodi's. Remember, Bittaker had put a lot of photographs behind Zodi's, but then there was also the van in impound. Bittaker was trying to hire inmates and get his attorney Garber to go get some stuff, to unscrew something. There was more stuff he had forgot. And it's always been speculated that his attorney or he sent Jason at night to go unscrew that. But it's never been talked about because it would be a huge crime because the van was in impound during the time. But we do know that Jason Spence and Garber went behind Zodi's and got the photographs. And Jackie Gilliam was one of the photographs taken. And the judge got Garber to give them over, but he had to threaten to put him in jail. He didn't want to give them over. Because he said, this is evidence on my case and it could hurt my client. It was a whole big thing. Yeah. But so
with what I know in my experience being around all these guys, I just don't believe anything was taken from that van by anybody other than law enforcement. I mean, just to get in that, when that van was put in evidence and held, you can't just walk in. Any Joe Blow off the street just can't walk in and get in there. And that's just never sat well with me because I just don't believe it. That's one thing that's always triggered me, was the fact that somebody can go in and take evidence out of impound. It's just no way.
I agree with you, but also properly motivated with money and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of stranger things have happened.
True, but
Yeah.
with these guys, I also, and I'm not saying this because I knew these guys personally. I mean, but I didn't meet Tom Cray till after '83 when my dad transferred over to Hermosa.
Mhm.
I don't think there was any amount of money that you could have paid these guys to do anything. These guys were straight up.
No, I don't think it was.
Found.
No, it was definitely not law enforcement. This would have been Bittaker's attorney or an inmate who would have broke out at night.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah, we don't think
Yeah.
that it was
These
law
guys,
enforcement
Oh,
at all.
no. This was
No,
his attorney had done this. No, not law enforcement. No way. And I have gone to the Hermosa impound lot because this has been a thing on the case, is whether or not Garber did get stuff, and which Carlo has said. And I mean, it's a fence. I mean, back in 1979, I'm sure it wouldn't have, there's no security cameras. It might have been easy, to hop over a fence at, 1 a.m. and unscrew something in the back of the taillight and pop something out. It wouldn't be too hard.
Yeah,
But no, nobody on law
even
enforcement.
even as smart as Bittaker was, I don't think he was that smart. You know, the one thing about, you know, that everybody says is how intelligent he was, and intelligent people are. They always get caught up by doing the dumbest stuff.
True.
I mean, you don't hide pictures and tapes behind the taillight, but leave the Ledford tape and the tape recorder in the van. You see what I'm saying? It's you're so
I know.
careful yet so
But what
careless.
you got to think, well, you also got to put into context. He gets the call. He calls Norris's place, and now he knows the cops are running. So imagine, you know, you've done some heinous shit. Cops are coming. You're facing death. You already know with what they were doing. So now he's in a mad dash to get all this stuff, all this evidence out of the van, and he's burying some, you know, out by Griffith Park, and then he's dropping his shoebox off at his friend's house, and he's putting pictures behind Zodi's, you know, like he's just in a mad dash. When you're in a mad dash like that, in a frenzy, you forget stuff. And that's how
Oh, yeah,
that is
of course.
how the Ledford tape was left
Left inside. Yeah.
left inside the tape. Yeah.
Yeah. He just forgot about it.
Yeah.
He was
He was in a total
he was
dash.
trying to just get everything, you know, away so he wouldn't get caught, but it was too late.
Right.
He's getting caught. Thank God.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really interesting to hear your experience, TJ, as someone who lived in that area and who personally knew the law enforcement, amazing team of law enforcement,
including your father,
who took down these two horrific killers.
Yeah.
Some have passed on, like Jim Rawson. He passed on in the 90s. My dad passed away in 21. But one of the good things I can look back on in my life is I was the one that got to tell my dad. I walked right into his bedroom and said, the first one, you know, Bittaker's dead, and then I got to tell him that Norris is dead. And even as sick as he was, he cracked a grin and said, good. I can't tell you what else he said, but it was to the point and specific. And I'm just glad he lived long enough to see them, you know,
Yeah.
die. It should have been. I mean, I understand Norris cut a deal, but Bittaker, he should have. They should have took care of that. You know,
well, they're gone now.
Did not deserve that.
Yeah.
No, they did not. Those girls did not deserve that. Those victims were innocent girls who didn't deserve to be terrorized and murdered in such horrific ways. And the
we
town
need to bring the other two home. They're still there.
Yeah.
You know,
Cindy and Andrea
their
in the
remains are
mountains.
still there. So, but real quick, I'm sorry, but I think there's more there. I don't think there's just two in those mountains. I think
We've always said that. It's a body farm up there for sure. It's a body farm. Yeah.
You know, I think if they had unlimited funds, I think they would have looked deeper and farther. But I think on the other hand, at the same time, they didn't want to, you know, delve deeper into that, and you know, in case they did find more, you know, because that would have just been, you know, so shocking to everybody, you know, that it's like, okay, this isn't over. We have to now find out who these people
Right.
are.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's
they
kind of what
wanted it
yours
over,
doing.
you know.
All
But they're still there, you know, just need to go get them.
Yeah. We're trying.
Exactly.
We're fighting. We are fighting to go searching there.
right.
TJ, if there's anybody from the case, whether Fred or whoever, would please invite them on here for us. We would love to speak to them.
Well,
You know, if they
I
would want to
haven't
come
heard
on.
back from Fred yet. So later today, I'll just, you know, I'll email you messenger his information.
Okay, great.
So you can reach out.
Perfect.
Thank you
Great.
so much, TJ. It was so nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, I wish
Yeah.
it was under better circumstances.
I know.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing that, you know, over 40 years later, these guys are still a topic of
Wanting
discussion.
us. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Good.
thank you so much, TJ.
You're welcome.
Laura, we'll talk to you soon, Laura.
All right.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.